Hey, it's me again. I'm doing another video, and this is actually a follow-up to my last video, which is some of the most overrated guitarists in the world. So this is just some of the most underrated guitarists in my opinion. So I have a list of about, let's see, about 7 or 8, and of course this is not an exhaustive, definitive list of all the most underrated guitarists because I know that I'd probably spend all day saying who they are if I had the time. So I just went through a lot of them that I like, and as a note, a lot of these guys are actually my favorite guitarists too. So beginning with Chuck Schuldiner from Death, I think he was underrated because the mainstream doesn't really know how much of an influence he had on a lot of extreme metal, and subsequently basically a lot of people's modern perceptions of metal are from extreme metal, which is not necessarily the truth of what metal really is, but I can go on about that. And so he, beginning with Death, their first demo was like 1983. It's called Death by Metal, and then what's known as death metal was basically invented by him and several others. But not only did he have a big influence on death metal, but he also had a big influence on technical metal and a lot of the more progressive styles of extreme metal that are around today, beginning with probably on the third album, maybe Human and albums like that basically started out a lot of the jazz influences in metal and a lot of the stuff like that. Of course, Atheist and a lot of other bands were doing stuff like that too, but he was kind of groundbreaking, and then obviously he died when he was trying to form a band or trying to do stuff with Control Denied, which is more power metal, progressive metal. Now the number 2 guy on my list, and this is not necessarily in order, is Uli John Roth. Now I know that he's not as underrated nowadays as he was back in the 70s and 80s, at least in the United States. If you don't know who he is, he was in the band The Scorpions, and I know a lot of people have a perception of the Scorpions, but basically in the 70s they were kind of peers of bands like Judas Priest and UFO and bands like that, kind of harder rock, heavy metal, and he invented, for better or worse, the neoclassical style of guitar playing that we see today. In my opinion, Ritchie Blackmore and other people were doing that stuff too, but he basically, like, if you speed up a few of his licks from the 70s, you basically have maybe a little bit more, maybe with a touch of Ritchie Blackmore, you basically have Malmsteen's entire career. Listen to a lot of the solos. He's very influenced by Jimi Hendrix, and he had a very keen fashion sense, but he was very influential and actually a big influence on me. So, and a lot of people haven't heard of him, and he did a lot of weird solo stuff in the 80s, which some of it's worth checking out, some of it isn't. Some of his singing is really bad. But anyways, so the third one I wanted to mention was John Christ. Now, John Christ was one of the people that influenced me growing up. And if you don't know who he is, he's from the band Danzig, or he was. It's a debate whether or not how much of a compositional influence he had in the band, because that's been debated. With Glenn Danzig is really not that great of a guitarist, and it probably was a matter of John Christ kind of expanding on what Danzig's ideas were, along with Rick Rubin and in the studio. And obviously, I don't think Glenn Danzig wrote his guitar solos, so I think that those guitar solos are very influential and very awesome. And some of the riffs, I think, were probably at least influenced by his playing. So, because I know that a lot of the albums say all songs written by Glenn Danzig, which is a load of probably bullshit. But no disrespect to Glenn, because I really am a fan. But anyways, and pinch harmonics that I do, I didn't get them from fucking Zakk Wylde. I got them from John Christ and later some other guys. But on the note of like punk metal crossover guys in metal, I think Rocky George is definitely one of the most underrated guitarist. He was in Suicidal Tendencies. Now he's in Fishbone. And his solo style in Suicidal Tendencies was kind of overlooked by a lot of other people. They were paying more attention to other stuff about Suicidal Tendencies, like the lyrics or the controversy. But he had basically a shred style, very fluid style that really was an influence, actually. You know, I really liked his soloing style, so just another note here. How far are we going? Okay, only 5 minutes so far. We have some time. So the next one is, and this is going to be a little controversial too, but, well, I don't know if it'll be controversial. But John Sykes is a big influence right now for me. He was in the band Whitesnake after they went so-called more hair metal after David Coverdale basically fired his whole band. They were a blues rock band in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, and they kind of went that direction. But the Whitesnake 1987 album, just the guitar tone and the solos and the riffs, the non-really bad commercial songs notwithstanding, which are basically like 2 songs on there. A lot of the riffs are really heavy, actually. That's basically a big influence on me. He was also in Thin Lizzy and Tigers of Pantane and Blue Murder, which are pretty cool bands too. So I'm really influenced by him. He's underrated. He had a great guitar tone. And a lot of actually Zakk Wylde's style is kind of similar to that bluesy kind of shred thing going on. So that kind of covers him. The next one. All right, continuing on with the most underrated guitarists. I kind of messed up the last section about Piggy, so I'm redoing it. Piggy from Voivod. Basically, what can I say? Voivod were a huge influence on progressive and technical metal. A lot of people may not like them because they prefer the more slick production of some other bands. I happen to be a punk at heart in some ways, so I like the punk metal style of early Voivod, and the more somewhat more slick production of their later albums in the 80s and early 90s. They were very influenced by Rush, Van de Graaff Generator, and King Crimson. And maybe they weren't like Dream Theater type of band or anything like that with music school guys or whatever, but it was very groundbreaking because Dimension Hatros in particular, just a lot of the progressions and the riffs and just very different than most bands were doing. It was more of a progressive thrash punk kind of thing, but people can take it or leave it, but I was very influenced by that. And then they subsequently, by covering Pink Floyd and mentioning in interviews, growing up as a kid, I got into Pink Floyd because of them. So, and even I think Rush too. So it's kind of a starter band for me for progressive metal, so-called. But his style was very influential and very underrated even now. And then finally, on the Pink Floyd note, I think Syd Barrett is very underrated as a whole, because the first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn from Pink Floyd, was released in 1967. It was recorded at the same time as Sgt. Pepper, and it's very underrated, and a lot of people don't know that there was a Pink Floyd before Dark Side of the Moon, and they should probably check it out because it's pretty trippy stuff. So, and that's basically my most underrated guitarist list. Could be a little more exciting, could have some more, probably could have some more guitarists in there, but basically I think a lot of the commercial players are not as good as some of these guys. I mean, in particular, I wish people were more knowledgeable about these guys, and they basically, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I didn't script this video, but I think that'll be all.